Ayubowan, welcome to 10 Minute Talks. I'm Harshadeva.
I'm delighted to welcome Professor Swarna Rajagopalan. Professor Swarna is a political scientist by training and peace educator by vocation. Her research focuses on human security, particularly in the South Asian context. She is also a strong advocate for gender inequality and has worked extensively as a trainer in disaster-related context. Together with Linda Rajopi, she co-edited Women and Disaster in South Asia, Survival, Security and Development, published by Routledge, India in 2016. Professor Sarna, it is a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you for joining me today. Let's get started. My first question is, as climate-related disasters become more frequent, men and women are affected differently, and disasters cannot be considered gender neutral. So, what gendered impacts are policymakers still failing to recognize?
Okay, so if you were in Sri Lanka and I'm in India, so if we take the 2004 tsunami as our baseline, I would say that coming from there to 2026, the one thing that I do see recognition of is that women's bodies are different. So this means that people are distributing sanitary napkins, they're more conscious about maybe underclothing being distributed and so on and so forth. However, when it comes to the things that are really hard to process even in normal times, titles, property titles, replacing your identity papers, say your ration card in the Indian context, or if your families are separated, being able to find. So that's sort of the bureaucratic underpinning of our societies, which is extensive and even tangled, where I don't think we've caught up to where we understand how much of that needs to be sorted out, not after the rations are distributed, but alongside. Because rehabilitation is only with underwear and sanitary napkins. The second thing that I wish policymakers would understand is that gender is not binary. You and I are also talking about men and women when we talk about differentiated impact. But there's a whole slice of our communities that is invisible. Those who are non binary, those who need special protections, those who might already have been isolated from their families. So I wish that in our configuration of relief work, in our configuration of reconstruction plans, we would take into account that there's actually more than one gender and if you intersect them with other changes, for example, in recent floods here, there were a lot of reports from the ground that relief supplies were reaching upper caste households first. So though we've not learned, and feminism is about looking at all of this together. So not just men, women, but this entire web of positionalities, we're still stuck in the I got a sari for a woman and a lungi for a man kind of mode. We're not. We've had 22 years, but we're still in first standard or first grade, whatever you want to call it. So that would be my disappointment. We're not learning fast enough.
Yes, Professor. So, in the humanitarian sector, women are often presented primarily as victims during disasters.
Mhm.
How can we look beyond and recognize and support them as leaders and decision makers in disaster preparedness and recovery?
I think that there are three in bearing witness to a crisis. There are three categories of people who become really important: media persons, who are actually on the ground with their cameras, with their notebooks, filing reports. Practitioners, whether they are social workers or their government. And the third is academics, people like me who might write a book about something. think when we go into the field, in order to recognize the agency that women do, in fact, exercise and to start seeing them as much more than victims, we need to be prepared to see them as agents. We need to look we need to look for their agency the way that traditionally we've gone into a place and looked for the head man. You know, you walk in and you say, Panchayat mein kaun hai? Who's in the Panchayat? You expect to see five men. You expect to talk to five men. But what about women? So until and unless we start listening to a plurality of voices and then amplifying that, say through a podcast like this, there, and this is what I saw, and this is what people were experiencing, until you bear witness and narrate and amplify, this is not going to shift. And it can't only be in conference presentations and so on. It's got to be in the public domain. It's got to be in places where everybody can see it to the point where it's common sense. It should be common sense. But as they say, common sense is quite uncommon.
Yes, Professor, this one is quite related as well. The post-disaster reconstruction become an opportunity to transform gender inequalities rather than to
Yes,
simply rebuild the same unequal social structures. So,
the very first thing about that I did on disasters, I actually framed my concept paper in terms of here's an opportunity, and I got quite correctly shot down, metaphorically speaking, by experience then answered. Everything is an opportunity. The question is, why aren't we taking up those opportunities? So, yes, if, for example, you're seeing women, if you just only look at women as a gender group, um, if you're seeing women means sanitary napkins, if it means that you say, okay, oh, you have a daughter of marriageable age, I will give you 10,000 rupees towards the wedding. If these are your kinds of assistance, I will set up a lace factory. I will set up embroidery. And these are cases that have come out of Sri Lanka. After the tsunami, communities where women were actively involved in processing the fish catch and getting it ready and taking it to market, they were being taught embroidery, which would keep them back in their house. Why are you taking away livelihoods? So if you're going to do something like that and reinforce patriarchal practices, where in fact you could say, hey, here you are, we're starting afresh, we're building you a new warehouse. Why don't you form a cooperative? Why don't you have a women's fishery cooperative? Why, there are many ways to bring that transformation about by giving women more control, more credit, and more autonomy. Not that, we'll give you all these things and then you do the work that we want you to do. I think they are anything, every moment is an opportunity, really. But again, what have we learned? What have we understood? What have we learned to parrot without understanding? All of that is reflected in the choices that we finally make as to whether we're going to reinforce and perpetuate the status quo or enable communities to be transformed and resilient while we're about it. So I think the choices that we make, if I have a minute, may I give you an example from the uh, the earthquake in Maharashtra in the, I think, around 2000. May I have a minute? So
sure,
this
Professor.
huge earthquake happened in Western India, and this organization that I really admire, Swayam Shikshan Prayog, actually trained women to be masons, to be bricklayers, to do all of the things that involved actual construction. Instead of assuming that only men in the village could construct, they trained women to do this. Those women went on to the next disaster to train other women. Over a period of time, they have become capable of going to the city, negotiating bank loans, negotiating credit, sharing credit, all kinds of things, complex first mile to last mile independence. And they become community leaders because once you know the plethora of things that you can actually do, why would you sit back? Why would you not be more vocal, more visible, and more when show more initiative? So there are models for this all over our region, but we have to be prepared to see them. We have to acknowledge that the possibility of transformation, the possibility of agency are all there.
Thank you, Professor. Let's talk more about our region. Yes, climate change is increasingly driving displacement across South Asia, of course, our
Mhm.
region. How can government support in ways that protect dignity, strengthen a social cohesion, and prevent further conflict?
I think, not being an expert, but undeterred anyway, let me suggest two areas in which government can help. The first, I think, is to acknowledge that climate change is real, but that it's also exacerbated by the kinds of developmental policies that you undertake, the kinds of choices, the kinds of urban planning, or even rural road construction, infrastructure planning, rural development, all of these have consequences for climate and therefore ultimately the lives of people. If you are not making that link, then you're only going to deepen the crisis, which is already pretty bad. Whether we're talking about rising temperatures, recurring floods, um, you know, avalanches, all sorts of things, you're just making the problem worse. So that's one part of it. I think seeing the connection between a deteriorating climate and your own choices and actions. The second part is related, but I would say specifically not engaging in development projects that are going to displace people. So you have coastal erosion, and people are moving away because fisheries as a livelihood are getting, I don't know, are becoming harder. So they're going to cities to find jobs. You're forcing, then you decide to acquire their land and you have some grandiose plan about tourism or something. You're making that by constructing on precarious ecologies, you're making that worse. Once you drive them into the city, you have no alternative. There's no housing, there are no jobs, you have no backup plan. First week of COVID, what India saw with the migrants walking back. In my lifetime, I don't want to see it again. So I think that we're not making that connection, and until we do, we're only going to be contributing to the problem. But to be fair to government, I don't think most of us are making the connection, right? Between our personal choices or our collective community choices. I live in this middle class neighborhood. My neighborhood has to be clean. I don't care what happens outside the periphery of that neighborhood. I think we are conditioned to making fairly selfish choices and we're not joining the dots at all. So, in the short term, the most pressing thing is to be making these, seeing these, learning to see, learning to listen, and learning to step back and erase yourself so that it's another informing something that you do.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you very much for this inspirational talk. I mean, really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for asking me.